The Alabama Bloodbath, the football coach who slaughtered 13 men over a stolen trophy. The summer heat in Mobile, Alabama pressed down like a heavy blanket, turning the asphalt into shimmering waves of distortion. Coach Marcus Webb stood in the trophy room of Roosevelt High School, staring at the empty pedestal where the state championship trophy had sat for 23 years. His reflection in the glass case showed a man whose once proud shoulders now sagged with the weight of loss. The trophy wasn't just metal and wood. It represented the greatest achievement of his coaching career, the season that had put him on the map, the golden year when everything aligned perfectly. Marcus was 52 years old, built like he'd played linebacker in his youth, which he had at the University of Alabama. His hands, calloused from years of gripping footballs and shaking hands with proud parents, now trembled slightly as he touched the empty space. The theft had occurred 3 nights ago during the weekend when the school was closed for maintenance. The security footage showed 3 masked men entering through a service entrance, moving with purpose directly to the trophy room. They knew exactly what they wanted. If you're watching this story unfold, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with how this devastating loss would set Marcus on a path he never imagined. Marcus had built his entire identity around football. After a knee injury ended his college career before he could make it to the pros, he'd channeled all his ambition into coaching. He married young to Sandra, a mathematics teacher at the same school, and they'd raised 2 daughters while he climbed the coaching ranks. That 2002 championship season wasn't just about the trophy. It was the culmination of a decade of 70-hour work weeks, missed family dinners and sacrificed vacations. When they'd hoisted that trophy after defeating Mountain Brook 31-28 in triple overtime, Marcus had felt vindicated. Every sacrifice had been worth it. The police investigation had gone cold within days. Detective Raymond Cooper, a weary veteran of the Mobile Police Department, had told Marcus there simply weren't enough leads. The security footage was grainy. The men wore gloves and there were no fingerprints. It appeared to be a targeted theft rather than random vandalism. Detective Cooper had even suggested the trophy might already be melted down for its metal value, words that had made Marcus's stomach turn. But Marcus couldn't let it go. He started his own investigation, spending his nights in the school parking lot, reviewing the footage frame by frame on his laptop. He noticed something the police had missed, a tattoo visible on one man's wrist when his sleeve rode up, reaching for the trophy case. It was distinctive. A serpent wrapped around a football. Marcus took screenshots and began visiting every tattoo parlor in Mobile, showing the image to artists and asking if they recognized the work. The search consumed him completely. Sandra watched her husband transform into someone she barely recognized. He stopped sleeping properly, surviving on coffee and obsession. His coaching suffered. Players noticed their normally intense but fair coach had become distracted, distant. During practice, Marcus would space out mid-drill, his mind clearly elsewhere. The assistant coaches covered for him, assuming he was stressed about the upcoming season. On the 7th parlor, he got his first break. The artist, a young woman named Crystal with purple hair and dozens of piercings, recognized it immediately. She'd done that tattoo 5 years ago on a man named Derek Jameson. She remembered because he'd been strange, requesting the exact design and insisting on getting it done at midnight. She still had his contact information in her records, though she was hesitant to share it until Marcus explained about the theft. Crystal had gone to Roosevelt herself years ago and remembered the championship season. She'd been in the marching band that performed at halftime of that legendary game. Derek Jameson lived in a rundown apartment complex on the west side of Mobile, the kind of place where rent was paid weekly and questions weren't asked. The building's exterior was faded yellow stucco, with rusted balconies and cars in various states of disrepair filling the parking lot. Marcus sat in his truck across the street for 2 nights, watching the building, learning Derek's patterns. He saw a man in his early 40s emerge each morning around 7, climbing into a beat-up Honda and driving to a job at the shipyard. He returned home around 6, usually alone, sometimes stopping at a liquor store first. On the 3rd night, Marcus's patience paid off. Derek emerged with 2 other men, all 3 laughing and climbing into a beat-up Ford pickup. Marcus followed them through Mobile's streets, keeping several car lengths back, his heart pounding. They drove to a warehouse district near the port, an area where abandoned industrial buildings sat alongside active facilities. The truck pulled into a lot beside a large corrugated metal warehouse with no visible signage. Marcus parked a block away and watched through binoculars he'd bought specifically for this surveillance. The three men entered through a side door, and lights flickered on inside. He could see shadows moving past grimy windows but couldn't make out details. He stayed there for 3 hours, his legs cramping in the truck's cab, before the men finally emerged and drove away. Marcus memorized the warehouse address and spent the next day researching it. The warehouse belonged to a man named Vincent Russo, someone Marcus vaguely recognized from high school football circles. Vincent had played for their biggest rival, Mountain Brook, and had been on the losing side of that championship game. Marcus felt his pulse quicken as pieces started connecting. This wasn't just a random theft. It was revenge, delayed by more than 2 decades, but finally executed. Vincent had been Mountain Brook's defensive captain in 2002, the player who'd failed to stop Roosevelt's final touchdown in triple overtime. Marcus began researching Vincent obsessively, using online databases and old newspaper archives. Vincent had played college ball at a Division II school, but never made it further. After college, he'd bounced between jobs, construction, warehouse work, eventually starting his own small freight business that operated out of that warehouse. He'd been married and divorced twice, had 3 kids from different relationships. His social media presence was minimal, but what existed showed a man who still wore his Mountain Brook Letterman jacket in photos, who still attended alumni games, who clearly hadn't moved past his high school glory days. The more Marcus learned, the more convinced he became that this was calculated revenge. Vincent had nursed that defeat for 23 years, letting it fester and grow until he'd finally acted. Marcus understood that obsession better than he wanted to admit. After all, wasn't he doing the same thing now, letting the trophy theft consume him entirely? He knew he should call Detective Cooper, hand over what he'd found and let the law handle it. That's what Sandra would tell him to do. She'd been worried about his obsession with finding the trophy, mentioning how he barely slept anymore and had stopped attending their younger daughter's college graduation ceremonies. Jessica had graduated summa cum laude from Auburn, a moment of tremendous pride, but Marcus had been staking out Derek's apartment that day. Sandra had attended alone, making excuses for her husband, but Jessica had been hurt. She'd barely spoken to Marcus since then, but something dark had taken root in Marcus's mind during those sleepless nights. The trophy represented everything he'd sacrificed, everything he'd built his identity upon. Letting the legal system handle it meant more delays, more bureaucracy, and possibly no justice at all. What if the trophy had already been sold or destroyed? What if Vincent and his crew got light sentences or walked free on technicalities? Marcus had spent his entire adult life teaching young men about accountability and consequences. It was time to deliver some consequences himself. He bought a burner phone from a gas station, paying cash, and called Vincent's warehouse. He disguised his voice slightly, pitching it lower, and posed as a potential buyer for stolen memorabilia. Vincent was cautious at first, asking how he'd gotten the number, where he'd heard about the merchandise. Marcus spun a story about being a collector from Birmingham, part of a network of enthusiasts who traded rare sports items. He mentioned he'd heard through mutual contacts about a rare Alabama championship trophy and would pay $20,000 cash, no questions asked. The mention of that specific amount seemed to intrigue Vincent. After a long pause, he agreed to a meeting. They arranged it for the following Tuesday night after dark at the warehouse. Vincent warned him to come alone and bring cash in unmarked bills. Marcus agreed to everything, his mind already racing ahead to what would actually happen at that meeting. Sandra noticed Marcus's strange behavior that week. He'd always been intense during football season, but this was different, quieter, more calculating. He spent hours in the garage, supposedly organizing equipment for the upcoming season, but she could hear him on the phone having hushed conversations. When she asked what was wrong, he'd kissed her forehead and assured her everything would be fine soon. He'd fix what was broken. She didn't press, trusting the man she'd spent 28 years with, though something in her gut whispered warnings she didn't want to acknowledge. Marcus spent those days planning. He withdrew money from their savings, not $20,000, but enough to make convincing prop bundles. He wrapped stacks of cut newspaper in real $100 bills, making them look legitimate at first glance. He practiced his story, the persona he'd adopt, the questions he'd ask. And he retrieved his grandfather's old pistol from the safe in their bedroom closet. The weapon was a Colt M1911, standard military issue from World War II. Marcus's grandfather had carried it through the Pacific Theater, through battles on islands whose names Marcus had heard stories about as a child. The old man had survived the war, come home, raised a family, and lived to 93 without ever firing the weapon in anger again. He'd given it to Marcus before dying, making him promise to keep it clean and maintain it. Marcus had done so faithfully, never imagining he'd actually use it. He took the pistol to a shooting range 2 hours away in Montgomery, where no one would recognize him. He'd shot rifles and shotguns before during hunting trips with his father, but never a handgun. The M1911 had significant recoil, and it took him most of a box of ammunition to get comfortable with it. By the end of the session, he could consistently hit center mass on the target from 20 feet. That would have to be enough. Tuesday night arrived with storm clouds building over Mobile Bay. The weather forecast predicted severe thunderstorms, possibly tornadoes typical for late summer in Alabama. Marcus told Sandra he was meeting with potential recruits and their families from Montgomery, a lie that tasted bitter in his mouth. She'd heard similar excuses dozens of times over the years. Recruiting was part of coaching, after all. But something in his eyes made her pause as he kissed her goodbye. She almost asked him to stay home, almost voiced her concerns. Instead, she just hugged him tightly and told him to drive carefully in the storm. Marcus drove to the warehouse district, carrying the duffel bag filled with bundled newspaper. The M1911 was in his jacket pocket, loaded with a full magazine, 7 rounds. He told himself it was just for protection, just in case things went wrong. He'd retrieve the trophy, maybe scare Vincent and his crew a little, then leave and call the police from a safe distance. That was the plan. That was what he told himself. The warehouse was dimly lit when he arrived, with high ceilings and the smell of motor oil and rust. Industrial shelves lined the walls, filled with boxes and equipment. A few work lights hung from chains, creating pools of illumination in the vast space. Vincent was there with 4 other men, including Derek Jameson. Marcus recognized another face, Tommy Shields, who'd been Mountain Brook's star quarterback in 2002. The player whose desperate 4th down pass in triple overtime had fallen incomplete, sealing Roosevelt's victory. The trophy sat on a wooden table in the center of the warehouse, gleaming under a hanging worklight, like some kind of altarpiece. Seeing it there, out of context, in this grimy industrial space, made Marcus's chest tighten. That trophy belonged in Roosevelt's display case, not here among these thieves and failures. Vincent was in his early 50s like Marcus, but harder-edged, with the look of someone who'd spent years working manual labor and nursing grudges. His face was weathered, lined with deep creases around his eyes and mouth. He wore a Mountain Brook football t-shirt, faded from countless washings. He smiled when Marcus entered, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You're the buyer? You look familiar." Marcus kept his voice steady, maintaining his disguised pitch. "I get that a lot. Mind if I inspect the merchandise before we talk money?" Vincent gestured to the trophy with a sweeping motion that seemed almost theatrical. "Be my guest, but we had to work hard to get this. The price might have gone up to $25,000. Marcus approached slowly, aware of the 4 other men watching him carefully. Derek stood to his left, arms crossed, the serpent tattoo clearly visible on his wrist. Tommy was to his right, leaning against a support column with the casual confidence of someone who'd once been a high school star. The other 2 men Marcus didn't recognize. One was Hispanic, maybe 40, with a scar across his chin. The other was younger, early 30s, with nervous energy that suggested this wasn't his usual line of work. As Marcus approached the trophy, his hands trembled again, but this time with barely contained rage. He could see scratches on the base where they'd pried it from its pedestal. Someone had handled it roughly, treating it like common merchandise instead of the sacred object it was. 23 years of pride, damaged and defiled. He picked it up, feeling its familiar weight, remembering the champagne showers and the joy of that victory. He remembered carrying it through the streets of Mobile on a parade float, surrounded by cheering crowds. He remembered his players taking turns holding it, their faces glowing with achievement. "This is worth way more than 25,000, Marcus said quietly, his real voice starting to break through. "It's priceless. It represents years of work, sacrifice, dedication. It represents building something meaningful." Tommy Shields laughed from his position by the column, a harsh sound that echoed in the warehouse. "Everything has a price, friend, even someone's legacy. That's capitalism, right? Supply and demand. We've got the supply, you've got the demand." Something in that word, legacy, combined with Tommy's mocking tone, made something snap inside Marcus. The rage he'd been suppressing for weeks, the frustration and obsession and sleepless nights, all came boiling to the surface. He turned to face them, still holding the trophy. "You know what this represents? Not just a game. Years of work, building young men into champions, teaching them about commitment and perseverance. This trophy is proof that dedication and hard work matter, that excellence is real and achievable." Vincent's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "And you know what it represented to us? Humiliation. Being second place. Having everyone in town remind us for years that we choked when it mattered. Mountain Brook was supposed to be the dynasty, not Roosevelt. We had better players, better facilities, more tradition. But you got lucky with one play and we never heard the end of it." "It wasn't luck," Marcus said, his voice rising. "We outplayed you. We were better prepared, better conditioned, better coached. We deserved that championship." "Better coached?" Vincent stepped closer, his face reddening. "You ran a trick play in overtime, something we'd never seen on film. That's not better coaching, that's desperation." "It's called creativity and preparation. We practiced that play for months, saved it for when we needed it most. That's exactly what good coaching looks like." Derek spoke up from the left, his voice carrying traces of a speech impediment. "Man, this isn't about football philosophy. You gonna buy the trophy or not? We don't have all night." Vincent held up a hand, silencing Derek, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "Wait. I know you. I know that voice." He stepped even closer, squinting in the dim light. "You're Marcus Webb. You're the coach." "Holy hell, guys, our buyer is Marcus Webb." The atmosphere in the warehouse shifted instantly. The casual transaction energy evaporated, replaced by tension thick enough to cut. Tommy pushed off from the column, suddenly alert. The Hispanic man moved his hand to his waistband. The nervous younger man looked confused, glancing between Vincent and Marcus. "So you came for your trophy," Vincent said slowly, processing this development. "No cash in that bag, I'm guessing." Marcus set the trophy down carefully on the table and pulled out the M1911, his hand surprisingly steady. The weight of the weapon felt right, purposeful. "I'm taking back what's mine, what you stole." Vincent didn't seem surprised or particularly concerned about the gun. He smiled, but it was dangerous now, predatory. "You know what? I'm glad it's you. This makes it even better. 23 years, coach. 23 years I've thought about that game, about how different my life might have been if we'd won. Maybe I would have gotten that Division I scholarship offer. Maybe I wouldn't have blown out my knee junior year of college. Maybe my life wouldn't have turned into this." "Your life choices aren't my responsibility," Marcus said. "No, but you get to be the symbol. How you and that damn trophy? You know how many times I've driven past Roosevelt and seen it in the display case? How many times I've had to hear people in this town talk about the miracle in Mobile and the greatest game ever played. It's been eating at me for over 2 decades. Tommy moved slightly to Marcus's right, trying to flank him. Marcus swung the gun toward him. "Don't. Everyone stay where you are." "So what's your plan, coach?" Vincent asked, pulling his own weapon from his waistband, a modern semi-automatic that looked well-maintained. "You're outnumbered 5-1. Even if you're fast enough to shoot me, my guys will take you down. This doesn't end well for you." The Hispanic man had drawn his weapon too, a snub-nosed revolver. Derek pulled a knife from his pocket, a wicked-looking blade that suggested he knew how to use it. The younger, nervous man backed away, hands raised. "Vincent, man, I didn't sign up for any shooting. This was supposed to be a simple sale." "Shut up, Carl," Vincent snapped, then back to Marcus. "Last chance, coach. Put the gun down, walk away. Keep your mouth shut about this. And we'll consider it even. Hell, you can even have your trophy back, we've made our point. Marcus knew he should take the offer. Walk away with the trophy, call the police from his truck, let them handle it. That was the rational choice, the right choice. But rationality had left him weeks ago. The gun felt powerful in his hand. And these men, these thieves who disrespected everything he'd built, deserved to pay for their crime. Turn over your weapons, Marcus said. All of you. Slide them across the floor to me. Vincent laughed. That's not happening. You're a high school football coach, Marcus. You're not a killer. You teach algebra and run drills. This isn't you. You don't know who I am anymore. Then prove it. Shoot me. Pull that trigger and become a murderer over a trophy. Throw away your whole life, your family, your career, everything, for a piece of metal and wood. That makes sense to you? The warehouse was silent, except for distant thunder rumbling outside. Rain began hitting the metal roof, a rhythmic drumming that would soon become deafening. Marcus's finger rested on the trigger, and for the first time in his life, he seriously contemplated killing another human being. These men had stolen from him, mocked him, threatened him. They'd taken something irreplaceable and shown no remorse. Vincent watched the calculation happening in Marcus's eyes and made a decision. He raised his own weapon, pointing it directly at Marcus's chest. Come on, coach. You came here for your trophy, then take it and go, or shoot me and spend the rest of your life in prison. Your choice, but make it fast because my patience is running out. Time seemed to slow. Marcus saw everything with crystalline clarity. The sweat beading on Vincent's forehead, the nervous twitching of Carl's hands, the cold calculation in Tommy's eyes as he slowly reached for his own weapon. The trophy gleamed on the table between them, the cause of all this conflict. Marcus thought about Sandra, about his daughters, about the players he'd coached over the years. What would they think if they could see him now? Then Vincent made a mistake. He smirked, just slightly, and said, "Knew you didn't have it in you. Just another soft teacher pretending to be hard." Marcus fired. The M1911 bucked in his hand, louder than he remembered from the range. The bullet caught Vincent in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping his weapon. Vincent screamed, clutching the wound as blood spread across his Mountain Brook t-shirt. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Tommy pulled his weapon and fired wildly, the shot going wide and punching through the corrugated metal wall. Marcus fired back, catching Tommy in the chest. The former quarterback stumbled backward, hitting the support column and sliding down it, leaving a red streak. Derek rushed forward with the knife, covering the distance between them faster than Marcus expected. The blade slashed across Marcus's forearm as he tried to bring the gun around. Pain lanced through him, hot and immediate. He fired point blank into Derek's stomach. Derek's momentum carried him into Marcus, knocking them both to the ground. The trophy crashed off the table, clattering across the concrete floor. The Hispanic man, whose name Marcus would later learn was Carlos Santos, fired his revolver. The bullet grazed Marcus's ribs, a line of fire that made him gasp. But he was already rolling, bringing the M1911 up as he moved. He fired twice, both shots hitting Carlo in the torso. Carlo dropped, his revolver skidding away across the floor. Carl, the nervous younger man, ran for the door, screaming. He fumbled with the lock, his hands shaking too badly to work it properly. Marcus stood, his own hands somehow steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. He aimed carefully and fired. The bullet hit Carl in the back, dropping him at the door. Vincent was still alive, crawling toward his dropped weapon with his good arm. Marcus walked over and kicked the gun away. Vincent looked up at him, his face pale from blood loss and shock. "You actually did it. You crazy son of a—" Marcus shot him in the head, ending the sentence. The warehouse fell silent except for the hammering rain on the roof and Marcus's ragged breathing. He stood there, surrounded by bodies, the M1911 still in his hand, smoke curling from its barrel. 4 men dead or dying, 4 lives ended. The trophy lay on its side 15 feet away, its polished surface now spattered with blood. Derek was still alive, barely, clutching his stomach and moaning. Marcus walked over and looked down at him. The man who'd gotten the serpent tattoo at midnight, whose artwork had been his undoing. Derek looked up with glazed eyes, trying to speak but only managing bloody bubbles. "Please," Derek finally whispered. "Hospital, I got kids." Marcus thought about showing mercy, calling 911, trying to save this one life at least. But then he thought about how Derek had helped steal the trophy, had laughed about it with Vincent, had pulled a knife and tried to kill him. He thought about the message that mercy would send, that there were no real consequences for theft, for disrespect, for violating what was sacred. He aimed the M1911 at Derek's head and pulled the trigger. The click was loud in the sudden silence. He was out of ammunition. Marcus stared at the empty gun, then at Derek, who was fading fast on his own anyway. The decision had been made, even if the execution failed. Marcus had fully committed to murder, had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Derek died while Marcus stood over him, the life draining from his eyes in the dimly lit warehouse. 5 men now, all dead because of a trophy. Marcus looked around at what he'd done, and instead of horror or remorse, he felt only a strange satisfaction. He'd recovered his property. He'd delivered consequences. He'd shown that some things were worth fighting for, worth killing for. The darkness in his mind whispered that he'd done the right thing, that justice had been served, but there was work to do. Marcus forced himself to think practically. He stripped off his jacket, which was blood-spattered, and used it to wipe down the trophy. He picked up all the shell casings from the M1911, counting them carefully. 7 rounds fired, 7 brass casings to collect. He found Vincent's phone and smashed it, then did the same with the others. He scattered the prop money from his duffel bag, making it look like a deal gone wrong over cash. The wound on his arm wouldn't stop bleeding, and his side where the bullet had grazed him was on fire. Marcus used duct tape from a shelf to create makeshift bandages, knowing he couldn't go to a hospital without raising questions. He grabbed the trophy and walked to the door, stepping over Carl's body. Outside, the storm had intensified. Rain fell in sheets, thunder crashing directly overhead. Lightning illuminated the warehouse district in stroboscopic flashes. Marcus put the trophy in his truck, then returned to the warehouse for one final detail. He found a space heater and placed it near a pile of oily rags and wooden pallets. He turned it on high, positioning it to create a fire hazard. With luck, the building would burn, destroying evidence and making the bodies harder to identify. He drove home through the storm, the trophy sitting on the passenger seat like an accomplice. His clothes were soaked from the rain, which helped hide the blood. His mind felt strangely detached, processing what had happened as if it were a football game to be analyzed. What had gone right, what had gone wrong, what adjustments were needed going forward. Sandra was already asleep when he returned. Marcus stripped in the garage, putting his bloody clothes in a trash bag. He cleaned the trophy meticulously, restoring it to its former glory, polishing away every trace of the violence it had witnessed. Then he cleaned the M1911, reloaded it, and hid it in the box of old coaching equipment. He showered in the guest bathroom, careful not to wake Sandra, watching blood and rainwater swirl down the drain. The wounds on his arm and side had stopped bleeding but would leave scars. He told himself he'd gotten them during a particularly intense practice, maybe breaking up a fight between players. Sandra would believe that. She'd seen him come home with bruises and minor injuries before. He climbed into bed around 3 in the morning, exhausted but unable to sleep. His mind replayed the shooting over and over, analyzing each moment. He'd made mistakes, used all his ammunition on just 5 targets, gotten wounded himself, left witness opportunities he should have eliminated. If he had to do it again, he'd be smarter, more efficient. That thought should have horrified him, but instead it felt like professional growth, like studying game film to improve performance. Sandra stirred beside him, rolling over and draping an arm across his chest. Her touch made him flinch, not from the wound on his side, but from the awareness of how far he'd traveled from the man she'd married. She murmured something in her sleep, something that sounded like his name. He stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd still love him if she knew what those hands had done just hours ago. The next morning, Marcus placed the trophy back on its pedestal at Roosevelt High before anyone arrived. It looked perfect there, catching the morning sunlight through the trophy room windows, every inch polished and gleaming. No sign of its 3-night absence, no hint of the blood that had been spattered across its surface. Marcus stood there for a long moment, feeling satisfaction settle over him like a warm blanket. Order had been restored. Justice had been delivered. His legacy was safe again. He went through his day teaching classes and running football drills, the model of a dedicated coach. His arm hurt where Derek's knife had cut him, and his side ached where Carlo's bullet had grazed him, but he pushed through the pain. Pain was temporary. The trophy was permanent. During practice, he was sharper than he'd been in weeks, focused and present, his obsession finally satisfied. The players noticed the difference, responding to his renewed energy with intensity of their own. When news broke that afternoon about the fire at the warehouse in the Port District, Marcus was in his office grading papers. A student volunteer from the front desk knocked on his door, mentioning she'd heard on the radio about a big fire, possibly with casualties. Marcus expressed appropriate concern, asked if she knew any details, then returned to his grading. His hand was steady as he marked incorrect answers with his red pen. The fire department found the bodies once they controlled the blaze. The warehouse had burned hot and fast, the metal structure collapsing inward. The arson investigator noted the suspicious origin point near the space heater, but the evidence was largely destroyed. 5 bodies were recovered, burned beyond easy recognition. Dental records and DNA testing would be needed for positive identification. Detective Raymond Cooper arrived at Roosevelt High that evening. Marcus was still in his office, watching practice film, when the detective knocked. Cooper was in his late 50s, with gray hair and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much human darkness. He'd been with the Mobile Police Department for over 30 years, working everything from domestic disputes to gang murders. He knew how to read people, how to sense when someone was hiding something. "Coach Webb, you have a few minutes?" Cooper asked, settling into the chair across from Marcus's desk without waiting for an invitation. "Of course, Detective. What can I help you with?" "We found 5 bodies in a warehouse fire down by the port. Looks like a drug deal or robbery gone bad. You hear anything about it?" Marcus shook his head. "Just what the students mentioned. Terrible thing. Any idea who the victims were?" "Not yet. Bodies are pretty badly burned, but we're working on it." Cooper studied Marcus carefully. "How's your football season looking?" The abrupt change in topic was deliberate, a technique to catch suspects off guard. Marcus recognized it from countless crime shows and movies. He smiled easily. "Early to say, but the team's looking strong. We've got a good crop of seniors with playoff experience. That championship trophy y'all have, that's from 2002, right? The year you beat Mountain Brook?" "That's right. Greatest game I ever coached." "I bet. Must have been devastating when it got stolen a few weeks back." Marcus's heart rate increased, but he kept his expression neutral. "It was. That trophy represents years of work, not just one season. But we got lucky. It turned back up a couple days ago. Someone must have had second thoughts about stealing it." Cooper nodded slowly. "Just turned up? Where?" "Right back on its pedestal. I came in early one morning and there it was, like it had never left. Figured whoever took it realized they couldn't sell it without getting caught. School trophies are pretty distinctive." "That is lucky. You report that to the police, that it came back?" Marcus hesitated just a fraction too long. "No, I didn't think to. Should I have? I was just grateful to have it back. Usually when stolen property is recovered, we like to know about it. Helps us close cases, understand the thieves' patterns." Cooper pulled out a small notebook. "Mind if I see this trophy? Take some photos for our records?" They walked to the trophy room together. Cooper examined the championship trophy carefully, taking photos from multiple angles with his phone. He ran his fingers along the base, checking the scratches where it had been pried from the pedestal. "These marks are fresh," Cooper observed, "consistent with forced removal, but the rest of it looks well maintained. Almost too well maintained, like someone recently polished it thoroughly." "I cleaned it up when it came back," Marcus said. "Whoever had it didn't treat it with proper respect." "I bet." Cooper took a few more photos, then turned to face Marcus directly. "You know what's strange? 5 men dead in that warehouse fire, and we're pretty sure at least one of them was Vincent Russo. You know Vincent?" Marcus kept his face carefully neutral. "The name sounds vaguely familiar, maybe from football." "He played for Mountain Brook, was their defensive captain in 2002, the year you beat them for the championship." "Oh, right. I remember now. Tough player, good instincts. What happened to him?" "Like I said, 5 bodies in a warehouse. Looks like violence before the fire. The medical examiner found what appears to be gunshot wounds, though the fire damage makes it hard to be certain. We're thinking maybe a robbery or a deal that went sideways. Probably drugs or stolen goods. Marcus shook his head sadly. It's a shame when people take wrong paths in life. Vincent had potential. Could have done something with himself if he'd made better choices. Cooper studied him for a long moment. Yeah, bad choices. Coach, you mind if I ask where you were Tuesday night? Just routine. We're asking everyone who might have had contact with the victims. Tuesday night, Marcus pretended to think, though he knew exactly where he'd been and what he'd done. I was meeting with some potential recruits from Montgomery. Late evening, got home around 11 or so, my wife can confirm. Names of the recruits? Marcus rattled off 2 names, real players he'd been courting, though he hadn't actually met with them Tuesday. He'd call them later, suggest meeting soon, create a paper trail. They'd assume he was confused about dates if anyone asked. Cooper wrote down the names. I'll check that out. And your wife, she was home Tuesday night? Yes, she was, grading papers, I think. She teaches math here. Mind if I have a word with her? This was dangerous territory. Sandra would back his story out of loyalty, but she'd also know something was wrong. And after the interview, she'd have questions, but refusing would look even more suspicious. Of course not. She should be in her classroom. I'll take you there. They walked through the hallways, passing lockers and bulletin boards covered with school announcements and student artwork. Sandra was indeed in her classroom, working at her desk on what looked like lesson plans. She looked up as they entered, surprise crossing her face when she saw the detective. Cooper introduced himself and asked his routine questions. Sandra confirmed that Marcus had been out Tuesday evening, had come home around 11, had mentioned meeting with recruits. She hadn't stayed up to see him arrive home. She'd been asleep, but she'd heard him come in. He'd showered in the guest bathroom so as not to wake her, which was considerate of him. Marcus watched his wife lie for him, providing his alibi without knowing she was covering for murder. Guilt twisted in his stomach, but he pushed it away. She was protecting him because she loved him, because she trusted him. He'd been protecting her too, in a way, by not telling her what he'd done. Some burdens were meant to be carried alone. After Cooper left, Sandra closed her classroom door and turned to Marcus. What was that about? Just routine questions about a fire near the port. Some people died. They're checking with everyone who might have known the victims. Did you know them? Vaguely. From football years ago. Marcus kissed her forehead. Nothing to worry about. I need to get back to practice film. I'll see you at home. She nodded, but her eyes held questions she didn't voice. Marcus left before those questions could take form, before his own guilt could push him to confess. He returned to his office and sat in the dark, thinking about what he'd started, about how easily the lies had come, about how naturally he'd manipulated his wife into providing false alibis. Over the next few days, the investigation into the warehouse fire dominated local news. The victims were identified: Vincent Russo, Derek Jameson, Tommy Shields, Carlos Santos, and Carl Bennett. All 5 had connections to Mountain Brook High School or to Vincent's freight business. The theory evolved that they'd been involved in trafficking stolen goods and had fallen victim to a robbery or a deal gone wrong. The evidence of gunshot wounds was confirmed, and ballistics recovered several bullets and fragments. .45 caliber, consistent with a large caliber handgun like a 1911, Detective Cooper kept digging. He tracked down the tattoo artist, Crystal, who mentioned that someone had been asking about Derek's serpent tattoo several weeks ago. She couldn't remember many details about the person, middle-aged maybe, dressed casually, said something about a theft. Cooper showed her photos, including one of Marcus from Roosevelt High's website. She thought it might be him but couldn't be certain. Cooper also investigated the trophy theft. He pulled the school security footage himself and reviewed it thoroughly. The 3 masked thieves had known exactly where they were going, exactly which trophy to take. It suggested inside knowledge or prior reconnaissance. He noted the date and time of the theft, then cross-referenced it with the warehouse fire timeline. The trophy disappeared on a Friday night, reappeared the following Monday morning according to Marcus's statement, and the fire occurred Tuesday night. The timeline was suspicious, but not conclusive. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to return to normal life, but normal felt impossible now. He'd killed 5 people, and that act had fundamentally changed him. Every interaction felt performance art. He was playing the role of Coach Marcus Webb, dedicated teacher and father figure to young athletes, while knowing he was really a murderer who'd executed 5 men in cold blood over a trophy. His relationship with Sandra deteriorated. She knew something was profoundly wrong, but couldn't pin down what. Marcus had become emotionally distant, going through the motions of their marriage without real connection. He stopped initiating intimacy, and when she tried, he found excuses. The truth was that he felt unworthy of her touch, contaminated by what he'd done, but he couldn't explain that without confessing. His daughter Jessica called one Sunday afternoon, wanting to talk about Thanksgiving plans. Marcus could barely focus on the conversation, his mind drifting to the warehouse, to the bodies, to Vincent's face when that final bullet struck him. Jessica noticed his distraction. "Dad, are you okay? You seem really out of it." "Just tired, sweetheart. Football season, you know how it is." "Mom says you've been acting weird lately, like something's wrong." Marcus forced enthusiasm into his voice. "Nothing's wrong, I'm fine. Tell me about your classes. How's organic chemistry going?" They talked for another 10 minutes, but it was hollow. After hanging up, Marcus stared at his phone and realized he'd barely registered anything Jessica had said. His daughters were slipping away from him, becoming strangers, all because he'd prioritized a trophy over humanity. But alongside the guilt came something else, a paranoid certainty that the killings weren't finished. Marcus had recovered his trophy and eliminated the immediate thieves, but he'd become convinced that Vincent's crew was just the beginning of a larger conspiracy. Someone had to have planned the theft, someone with resources and motive beyond what Vincent possessed. Marcus began keeping detailed notes about everyone who might have been involved. He listed former Mountain Brook players, boosters who'd been vocal after the 2002 loss, even rival coaches who might have resented his success. He made connections that existed nowhere but in his increasingly unstable mind. The notebook filled with names, relationships, potential motives. 8 names emerged as high-priority targets, people who Marcus believed were part of the conspiracy to steal his trophy and destroy his legacy. The first name was Richard Kelly, the wealthy Mountain Brook booster he'd identified earlier. Richard had been a vocal supporter of the Mountain Brook program in 2002, often seen at games and functions. After the championship loss, he'd supposedly reduced his donations, blaming the coaching staff for the defeat. At least, that was the story Marcus had pieced together from old newspaper articles and social media posts. It wasn't much evidence, but in Marcus's mind, it was enough. The second name was Gerald "Jerry" Patterson, who'd been Mountain Brook's head coach in 2002. Jerry had resigned after that season, supposedly for health reasons, but Marcus now believed the championship loss had broken him. Jerry had moved to Florida, but Marcus tracked him down through coaching networks. He lived in Pensacola, just a few hours away, close enough to have maintained connections and orchestrated revenge. The third name was Marcus's own assistant coach, Brian Turner. This was perhaps the most paranoid addition to the list, but Marcus had noticed Brian acting strangely lately, asking too many questions about Marcus's mood, mentioning the trophy theft casually in conversation, watching Marcus too closely during practice. Brian had played football at Mountain Brook before Marcus's time there, and maybe he'd held secret loyalty to his alma mater all these years. The 4th through 8th names were former Mountain Brook players: Ron Davies, Michael Chen, Anthony Wright, James Morrison, and Kevin Tucker. All had been on the 2002 team, all had stayed in the Mobile area, and all had careers that hadn't lived up to their high school potential. Marcus convinced himself that these men nursed resentment about the championship loss, that they'd finally acted on those feelings through Vincent's crew. Looking at his list objectively, if objectivity was even possible at this point, Marcus might have recognized his thoughts as paranoid delusions. But objectivity had abandoned him. The darkness that had taken root in the warehouse now controlled his perception. Everyone was suspect. Everyone was a potential threat to his legacy. The trophy was safe for now, but how long before the next attack came? How long before someone else tried to destroy what he'd built? He began investigating these 8 targets with the same intensity he'd focused on Vincent's crew. He followed Richard Kelly for days, learning his routines, photographing his house and business. Richard was a commercial real estate developer, successful and seemingly respectable. He drove a Mercedes, lived in a gated community, attended charity functions with his wife. Marcus could find no connection to Vincent or the warehouse, no evidence of criminal activity. But that just meant Richard was careful, hiding his involvement well. Jerry Patterson, the former coach in Pensacola, proved more difficult to surveil from Mobile. Marcus started taking weekend trips, telling Sandra he was scouting potential opponents or attending coaching clinics. He'd drive the few hours to Florida, stake out Jerry's modest ranch house, watch the old man tend his garden, and play with his grandchildren. Jerry looked content, at peace with his retirement, but Marcus saw it as a disguise, a facade hiding darker motivations. Brian Turner was easiest to watch since they worked together daily. Marcus began noting every interaction, every word, every gesture that might reveal his assistant coach's true loyalties. When Brian suggested adjusting the offensive playbook, Marcus saw manipulation. When Brian praised a player's performance, Marcus heard underlying criticism of his own coaching. The paranoia was all-consuming, transforming every moment into potential evidence of betrayal. The 5 former Mountain Brook players were all busy with their own lives, working jobs, raising families, coaching youth leagues. Marcus watched them from parking lots and distant corners, his notebook filling with observations that meant nothing to anyone but him. Ron Davies worked as an electrician. Michael Chen ran a restaurant. Anthony Wright sold insurance. James Morrison managed a construction crew. Kevin Tucker taught history at a middle school. All normal, boring lives, all hiding secrets, Marcus was certain. Sandra finally confronted him about his behavior 3 weeks after the warehouse killings. She'd found receipts for the gas station purchases before his Florida trips, noticed the new notebook filled with names and observations, seen how he'd started carrying the M19 weapon in his truck's glove compartment. They sat in their living room on a Thursday night, the house quiet around them. Sandra had clearly been preparing this conversation, gathering her evidence and courage. "Marcus, I need you to tell me what's going on, and I need the truth this time." He looked at his wife of 28 years, this woman who'd supported him through countless challenges, who'd raised their daughters largely alone during football seasons, who'd believed in him when he was just a young assistant coach with big dreams. She deserved honesty. She deserved a husband who wasn't a murderer and a liar. "I don't know what you mean," he said instead. "The trips to Florida, the notebook with names, the gun you've started carrying, the way you've been acting since the trophy came back. Something happened, and I need to know what it is." Marcus felt the confession rising in his throat, words that would destroy everything but might also provide relief. He could tell her about the warehouse, about Vincent and his crew, about the 5 men he'd killed. She'd leave him, certainly. Probably call the police, but at least the pretense would end. At least he could stop lying to the person he loved most. Instead, he spun another lie. He told her about discovering a recruiting violation scheme involving several rival schools, including Mountain Brook. He claimed he was gathering evidence to present to the State Athletic Association, but it had to be done carefully to avoid legal repercussions. The notebook was his documentation. The trips were for in-person verification. The gun was because some of the people involved were potentially dangerous. The lie came so easily now, flowing naturally like he'd rehearsed it, and Sandra wanted to believe it. She wanted her husband to be the man she'd married, not the stranger he'd become. So she accepted the explanation, even though her instincts screamed that something darker was happening. "If you're in danger, we should call the police," she said. "No police until I have solid evidence, otherwise it's my word against theirs, and I could lose my job over false accusations." She reluctantly agreed to wait, to let him handle it his way. But she also made him promise to be careful, to not take unnecessary risks, to remember that football wasn't worth dying over. Marcus agreed to all of it, even as he planned his next surveillance trip, even as he mentally added a 9th name to his list, Sandra herself. Not as a target, but as a potential obstacle. If she started digging into his lies, if she found evidence of the murders, she might become a liability. That thought should have horrified him, but instead it just felt like strategic thinking, like planning for all contingencies. Detective Cooper continued his investigation, methodical and persistent. He interviewed Crystal, the tattoo artist, multiple times, showing her enhanced photos of Marcus, trying to get a positive identification. She remained uncertain. The man who'd asked about Derek's tattoo could have been Marcus, but could also have been dozens of other middle-aged men in Mobile. Cooper also looked into the recovered trophies timeline more carefully. He visited Roosevelt High multiple times, examining the trophy room, reviewing security footage from the days around its reappearance. The footage showed Marcus arriving early on that Monday morning, before any staff or students. The timestamp was 5:47 a.m. Marcus had been carrying something, a duffel bag, perhaps large enough to contain a trophy. He'd entered the building, spent 14 minutes inside, then left without the bag. The trophy was back on its pedestal when the first staff members arrived at 6:30 a.m. Cooper brought Marcus in for another interview, this time at the police station. It was informal, not an interrogation. Marcus wasn't under arrest or even officially a suspect. But the detective's questions had become more pointed, more specific. Coach Webb, I've been reviewing the security footage from your school. You arrived pretty early that Monday morning, the day the trophy reappeared. Marcus kept his voice casual. I often get there early during season. Helps me prepare for the day. Get some quiet time to review game film. You were carrying a large bag. What was in it? Probably equipment, footballs, cones, that sort of thing. I keep extra gear in my truck and bring it in as needed. The bag looked heavy, like you were carrying something substantial. Marcus shrugged. Coach life, always hauling something. Cooper pulled out a folder and extracted several photographs. They showed the trophy in detail, the scratches on the base, the polished surface, angles highlighting every detail. These marks here, where it was pried off the pedestal, they're consistent with the tools we found in Vincent Russo's warehouse. Before the fire destroyed most of the evidence, our team photographed the crime scene. We found pry bars, glass cutters, other burglary tools. I'm not sure what you're implying, Detective. I'm not implying anything, just stating facts. Vincent Russo and his crew stole your trophy. You somehow got it back. Then they all died violently. Timeline's pretty clear. Coincidence, I already told you the trophy just appeared back on its pedestal. I don't know how it got there. Cooper leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with those tired, knowing eyes. Here's what I think happened. I think you tracked down who stole your trophy. Maybe through that tattoo artist. Maybe another way. You found Vincent's warehouse, confronted them, and things got violent. 5 men died. You recovered your trophy, staged a fire to cover evidence, and returned the trophy to your school. Am I close? Marcus met his gaze steadily. That's quite a theory, but it's just a theory, right? You have evidence to support it? The video footage of your truck in the warehouse district. Timestamps put you near the scene during a window consistent with the murders. We've got .45 caliber bullets from the victims, same caliber as that old M1911 you inherited from your grandfather. We've got motive, the stolen trophy. We've got opportunity, you knew where they were. Circumstantial at best. My truck is a common model. Lots of people own 1911s, and I didn't know where anyone was. But you did track down Derek Jameson through that tattoo artist. No. I showed her a picture from the security footage, asked if she recognized the art. She thought she might have, gave me a name, but I passed that information to you, didn't I? The lie was smooth, confident. Cooper consulted his notes. No record of you calling that in. No report filed. Must have slipped my mind with everything else going on. Football season, you know. They sat in silence for a long moment. Cooper finally closed his folder. You're right that everything I have is circumstantial. A good defense attorney would shred it. But Marcus, I know you did this, and eventually I'm going to prove it. If you're so convinced, why not arrest me? Because the DA won't prosecute without stronger evidence. But I'm patient. I've been doing this 30 years. Killers make mistakes. They get comfortable, cocky. They slip up. And when you slip up, I'll be there. Marcus stood to leave. Am I free to go? For now, but Coach, that trophy isn't worth what you paid for it. Even if I never prove what you did, you'll spend the rest of your life knowing you murdered 5 people. That's its own kind of prison. Marcus left the police station and drove home, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Cooper was too close, asking the right questions, building a circumstantial case that might eventually become prosecutable. But more concerning was the detective's last statement about living with what he'd done. Because the truth was, Marcus didn't feel the guilt Cooper assumed. He felt justified. Those men had stolen from him, and he'd delivered consequences. The only guilt he felt was about lying to Sandra and alienating his daughters. The actual killings, those felt like necessary actions, problems solved. That realization should have alarmed him, should have revealed how far he'd fallen from the man he used to be. Instead, it just felt like acceptance of a new reality. He was a killer now. That was a fact, like being a coach or a father. It was simply part of his identity. His investigation into the 8 names continued. Marcus became more careful about his surveillance, varying his routes and times, using cash for everything, parking farther away and walking to observation points. He bought a prepaid laptop and started researching through public Wi-Fi at coffee shops, never from home or school. He learned about their families, their financial situations, their routines. He looked for vulnerabilities, for opportunities. Richard Kelly proved the hardest to crack. The real estate developer was wealthy enough to have security systems, lived in a gated community, and varied his schedule unpredictably. But Marcus was patient. He learned that Richard played golf every Saturday morning at the Mobile Country Club, always arriving between 7 and 8 a.m. The parking lot was perfect, isolated with poor camera coverage in certain areas. Marcus started planning. Jerry Patterson in Pensacola was easier. The retired coach lived alone since his wife's death 2 years ago. His children visited on weekends sometimes, but weekdays found him alone in that ranch house. He walked the same route every morning, through a neighborhood that was quiet and sparsely populated. An accident could happen, a robbery gone wrong, something. Brian Turner worked at Roosevelt, which made him both easy to access and dangerous to target. Any violence there would immediately draw attention to Marcus. But Brian had a routine. He stopped at the same gas station every morning before school, always went inside to buy coffee and a breakfast sandwich. The gas station was in a rough neighborhood, the kind of place where robberies occurred regularly. It wouldn't be unusual. The 5 former Mountain Brook players each had their own patterns, their own vulnerabilities. Marcus documented everything, building files on each target like he was scouting opposing teams. He noted their work schedules, their favorite restaurants, where their kids went to school, which gyms they used. Information was power, and Marcus was gathering an arsenal. But as he planned, a voice in the back of his mind, the part that was still rational, still human, kept asking what the endgame was. Even if these 8 people were somehow involved in the trophy theft, which they almost certainly weren't, what would killing them accomplish? Would it bring peace? Would it restore what he'd lost, or would it just dig him deeper into darkness until there was no light left at all? Marcus ignored that voice. He'd crossed a line in the warehouse and there was no going back. The only direction was forward, deeper into the paranoia and violence. The trophy sat in its case at Roosevelt High, gleaming and perfect, but it no longer brought him satisfaction. He needed more revenge, more control, more proof that his legacy was secure. The first new killing happened on a Saturday morning in October. Marcus woke before dawn, kissed the sleeping Sandra, and drove to the Mobile Country Club. He parked in a secluded corner of the lot and waited. The M1911 was loaded and ready in his lap. He'd practiced the scenario dozens of times in his mind. Richard Kelly would arrive, park, get his golf clubs from his trunk. Marcus would approach, confront him about the trophy conspiracy, force a confession. Then, depending on what Richard admitted, Marcus would decide his fate. Richard arrived at 7:23 a.m., driving his Mercedes sedan. He parked 3 spaces away from Marcus's truck, perfectly positioned. Marcus watched as Richard got out, stretched, popped his trunk to retrieve his golf bag. This was the moment. Marcus stepped out of his truck, the M1911 hidden under a light jacket. He approached casually like a fellow golfer. Richard glanced up, smiled politely, then returned to organizing his clubs. "Richard Kelly?" Marcus asked. "That's right. Do I know you?" "Marcus Webb, Roosevelt High football coach." Recognition flickered across Richard's face. "Oh, sure, I remember you. That championship game back in '02, hell of a game." What brings you out here? I want to talk about my trophy, the one that was stolen. Richard's friendly expression shifted to confusion. Trophy? I heard something about that. It got stolen and returned, right? What's that got to do with me? Don't play dumb. You funded Vincent Russo and his crew. You've been holding a grudge about that championship loss for 23 years. Richard's confusion deepened into concern. He took a step back, his hand moving toward his pocket, probably for his phone. I have no idea what you're talking about. Vincent Russo, I haven't thought about that game in years. It's ancient history. Liar. Marcus pulled the M1911, pointing it at Richard's chest. Tell me the truth. Admit what you did. Richard's eyes went wide, his hands coming up in a placating gesture. Jesus Christ, put that away. I swear I don't know anything about any trophy theft. I didn't fund anyone. This is insane. Other cars were starting to arrive in the parking lot. Marcus had maybe 2 minutes before someone saw them. He needed Richard to confess, needed validation that his theory was correct, that these killings were justified. Last chance, the truth. I am telling the truth. I'm a real estate developer. I go to work, play golf, spend time with my family. I don't steal trophies or fund conspiracies. You've got the wrong person. But Marcus couldn't accept that. Accepting it would mean he was wrong, that the paranoia was unfounded, that he was planning to murder an innocent man. So instead he chose to believe Richard was lying, was part of the conspiracy, was guilty and deserved execution. He pulled the trigger. The shot echoed across the parking lot, obscenely loud in the quiet morning. Richard collapsed, a red stain spreading across his golf shirt. He looked up at Marcus with dying eyes. Confusion and terror mixed together and whispered, "Why?" Marcus didn't have an answer. He ran back to his truck and drove away, leaving Richard bleeding out in the country club parking lot. Behind him, he could hear shouting, people running to help. But it was too late. Richard Kelly died before the ambulance arrived, killed over a conspiracy that existed only in his murderer's mind. The shooting dominated local news. A respected businessman, murdered in a country club parking lot during a robbery attempt. That was the initial theory. Someone had tried to rob Richard, shot him when he resisted, fled without taking anything. Security camera footage caught a dark-colored truck leaving the scene, but the image was too grainy and distant for identification. Multiple people owned dark trucks in Mobile. Detective Cooper responded to the scene. He stood in that parking lot, looking at Richard Kelly's body and the scattered golf clubs, and felt his instincts screaming. This had Marcus Webb written all over it: the .45 caliber wound, the execution-style shooting, the lack of actual robbery. But proving it was another matter. Cooper pulled the country club security footage and studied the dark truck frame by frame. The shape was consistent with Marcus's vehicle, but he couldn't make out a license plate or any identifying features. He checked Marcus's alibi. The coach claimed he'd been home that Saturday morning, sleeping in. Sandra confirmed it, though she admitted she'd been asleep herself until around 9. She couldn't actually verify Marcus was there the entire morning. The detective started building a larger case, connecting the warehouse murders to Richard Kelly's death. Same caliber weapon, likely same shooter. He requested a warrant to search Marcus's home and truck for the M1911, but the judge denied it. Insufficient evidence linking Marcus to either crime. Circumstantial suspicions weren't enough for a search warrant. Marcus, meanwhile, felt exhilarated rather than guilty. He'd acted decisively, eliminated a threat, protected his legacy. The fact that Richard had maintained innocence even while dying didn't penetrate Marcus's paranoia. In his mind, Richard had been lying until the end, refusing to admit his involvement. That made him even more dangerous, clever enough to maintain the deception, organized enough to hide evidence. Killing him had been necessary, but the murder also escalated the situation. Cooper was now investigating both crime scenes, looking for connections. The detective had stopped by Roosevelt High again, asking more pointed questions, studying Marcus's reactions. The net was tightening, even if slowly. Marcus needed to be more careful with the remaining 7 targets, or he needed to act faster, eliminate them all before Cooper could build a prosecutable case. He chose speed. Over the next 3 weeks, Marcus became a serial killer. The darkness that had taken root in the warehouse now consumed him entirely. Every remaining name on his list became a target, every person, a threat that needed elimination. Jerry Patterson died in Pensacola, shot during his morning walk. The scene looked like a random mugging. Jerry's wallet was missing, his watch taken. But it was staged. Marcus had shot him from behind, execution style, then taken those items to make it look like robbery. Jerry's last moments were spent face down on a suburban sidewalk, bleeding out, while neighbors called 911. Brian Turner died at that gas station, caught in what appeared to be a robbery. Security footage showed a figure in a hoodie and mask entering the gas station convenience store, demanding money from the register. When Brian tried to intervene, tried to be the hero, the robber shot him twice and fled. Witnesses described a voice that might have been male, medium height and build, nothing distinctive. The robber's voice had been Marcus's, disguised and distorted, but recognizable enough if someone listened carefully. The 5 former Mountain Brook players died over 3 weeks in various staged accidents and attacks. Ron Davies fell from a ladder at a construction site, but investigators found evidence that the ladder had been sabotaged, bolts loosened, rails weakened. Michael Chen's restaurant burned down with him inside, the fire starting from a gas leak that appeared accidental but showed signs of tampering. Anthony Wright died in a car accident when his brakes failed, sending him off a bridge into Mobile Bay. James Morrison was shot during a home invasion, though nothing was actually stolen. Kevin Tucker died from a beating in a bar parking lot, supposedly a fight that got out of hand, though witnesses couldn't identify the other participant. 8 more murders, 13 total, counting the warehouse victims. Marcus Webb had become the Alabama bloodbath, though police hadn't yet connected all the killings to a single perpetrator. Different methods, different locations, different apparent motives. It looked like a crime wave rather than a serial killer. But Detective Cooper saw the patterns. He laid out all 13 cases on a board in his office, drawing connections, noting similarities. All victims were connected to Mountain Brook High School. All died after the trophy theft. Several were killed with .45 caliber weapons, likely the same gun. The timeline was compressed, 8 killings in 3 weeks plus the 5 from the warehouse. This was someone on a mission, eliminating targets systematically. Cooper brought his theory to his lieutenant, a pragmatic woman named Sharon Davies, who'd seen her share of serial cases. She studied the board, the photos, the evidence reports. "This is one killer?" she asked. "Staging all these different crime scenes?" "I believe so, and I think I know who it is." Cooper pulled up Marcus Webb's file. Marcus Webb, football coach at Roosevelt High. His trophy was stolen by Vincent Russo's crew. After recovering it, he's been systematically killing anyone he believes was involved in the conspiracy. Conspiracy? What conspiracy? The one that exists in his head. "I think Coach Webb has had a psychotic break. He's convinced there's a larger plot against him, and he's eliminating the perceived conspirators." Davies studied Marcus's photo, a professional headshot from the Roosevelt High website, showing a confident middle-aged man in a coaching polo, arms crossed, slight smile. He looked stable, respectable, exactly like what he was supposed to be. "Can we prove any of this?" Davies asked. "Not yet, everything is circumstantial, but I'm requesting a task force, round-the-clock surveillance on Webb, full forensic workup on his vehicle and property." "That's a lot of resources for circumstantial evidence. 13 people are dead. If I'm right, he's not done yet." Davies authorized a limited surveillance team, 2 detectives who would monitor Marcus's movements, document his activities, look for actionable evidence. She denied the search warrant request again, but approved subpoenas for Marcus's financial records, phone records, and electronic communications. Marcus, driving home from Kevin Tucker's funeral, noticed the surveillance. A grey sedan had been following him for the past hour, maintaining distance but always there. He varied his route, taking random turns, doubling back. The sedan stayed with him. Professional surveillance, probably police. Instead of panic, Marcus felt almost relieved. The endgame was approaching. He'd eliminated the conspirators, protected his legacy, done what needed to be done. If the police finally had enough evidence to arrest him, so be it. He'd face justice, but on his terms, having completed his mission. He drove to Roosevelt High and parked in his usual spot, The grey sedan parked across the street, two figures visible in the front seats. Marcus sat in his truck for a moment, looking at the school building where he'd spent his career. The football field where he'd coached countless games. This might be the last time he saw it as a free man. He walked into the building and went straight to the trophy room. The championship trophy gleamed on its pedestal, perfect and undisturbed. All those deaths, all that violence, all to protect this object. Marcus reached out and touched it, feeling the cool metal, remembering that perfect season in 2002 when everything had made sense. "Was it worth it?" a voice asked behind him. Marcus turned to find Sandra standing in the doorway. She looked exhausted, older somehow, her face drawn with worry and knowledge. She'd figured it out. Maybe not all the details, but enough. "The trophy," she continued, stepping into the room. "Was it worth 13 lives? Because I know, Marcus, I've known for weeks. I just didn't want to believe it." Marcus felt strangely calm. "You're right. 13 lives. All because they threatened what I'd built. Richard Kelly didn't threaten anything. Jerry Patterson was retired and peaceful. Brian was your friend. Those other men had families, children who needed them. And you killed them all over a conspiracy that didn't exist." "It existed. They stole my trophy, planned to destroy my legacy." "No, Vincent stole it. Vincent and 4 other desperate men who made a terrible choice. Everyone else you killed was innocent. You created a conspiracy in your mind to justify murder." Marcus sat down heavily on a bench, suddenly exhausted. "I couldn't let it go. That trophy represented everything. It represents nothing. It's just an object, Marcus, metal and wood. You were someone before you won it, and you'd still be someone without it. But you can't see that. You built your entire identity around winning, around external validation, and when someone threatened that, you completely fell apart." "What are you going to do?" Marcus asked. "Call the police, turn me in?" Sandra wiped tears from her eyes. "The police already know. They're outside waiting for you. Detective Cooper came to see me this morning, showed me evidence, asked for my help. I told him everything, the gun, the trips, the notebook, your behavior. I gave him permission to search our house. They found the M1911, Marcus. They found blood traces in your truck bed from where you transported Richard Kelly's body. It's over." Marcus nodded slowly. He'd known this day would come, had almost welcomed it. "I'm sorry I dragged you into this. You deserved better." "Yes, I did. Our daughters did. All those people you killed did. Everyone deserved better than your obsession." She turned to leave, then paused. "The saddest part is that you were a good coach, a good teacher. You helped so many young men become better people. But you couldn't apply those lessons to yourself. You taught them about character and integrity while having none of your own." She left. Marcus sat alone in the trophy room for a few more minutes, saying goodbye to the life he'd known. Then he walked outside, where Detective Cooper and 4 other officers were waiting. They read him his rights as they cuffed him. Students and teachers watched from windows, shocked and confused. Marcus Webb, their beloved coach, being arrested. Cooper drove Marcus to the station personally. During the ride, the detective finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "Why not stop after the warehouse? You'd recovered your trophy, eliminated the actual thieves. Why keep going?" Marcus stared out the window at Mobile passing by. "Because recovering the trophy wasn't enough. I needed to eliminate the threat completely, make sure no one could ever take it again. I needed to prove that my legacy was worth defending, that I mattered enough to fight for. And now? You think it was worth it?" Marcus thought about Sandra's face, about his daughters who wouldn't return his calls, about the 13 lives he'd taken. "No, I destroyed everything trying to protect a symbol. But I couldn't see that then. The obsession was complete. I'd stopped being Marcus Webb the person and become Marcus Webb the coach, Marcus Webb the champion. Without the trophy, I thought I'd be nothing. And now I'm just a murderer, which is worse than nothing." The trial was brief, with Sandra's testimony, the forensic evidence from his truck and weapon, the financial records showing his trips to surveillance sites, and his own partial confession to Cooper. The case was overwhelming. Marcus's lawyer advised him to plead guilty and accept a deal, but Marcus insisted on going to trial. He wanted his day in court, wanted to explain publicly why he'd done what he'd done. Marcus was remanded immediately to Holman Correctional Facility, Alabama's maximum security prison. He was 53 years old. Statistically, he'd likely live another 20 to 30 years. All of them behind bars. All of them with the knowledge of what he'd done. Prison life was harsh but predictable. Marcus was kept in protective custody, initially due to his notoriety. The Alabama bloodbath had been sensationalized in media coverage, making him a target. But eventually, he was moved to general population, where he had to navigate the complex social dynamics of prison life. Surprisingly, Marcus found purpose there. He started teaching GED classes, helping inmates earn their high school equivalency diplomas. He coached the prison's flag football league, bringing joy to men who'd been forgotten by society. He mentored younger prisoners, trying to steer them away from the mindsets that had destroyed his own life: obsession, pride, inability to accept loss. His daughters never visited. Jessica sent a single letter 2 years into his sentence, explaining that she'd started therapy to process her father's crimes, and her therapist advised cutting contact completely. She'd changed her name legally, wanting no association with Marcus Webb. His older daughter, Michelle, sent nothing at all. Marcus wrote them monthly letters anyway, not expecting responses but needing to say the words. Apologies, explanations, regrets. The letters went unanswered. Sandra divorced him 6 months after his conviction. She moved to Georgia to be near Michelle, started a new life teaching math at a community college. She remarried after 5 years to a kind widower who treated her gently and never asked about her first husband. She lived the remaining decades of her life in peace, though she never fully forgave herself for not seeing the warning signs earlier, for not stopping Marcus before the body count grew so high. The trophy remained at Roosevelt High for another decade after Marcus's death, before finally being retired to storage. A new generation of students had no connection to it, saw it only as a reminder of tragedy rather than triumph. The 2002 championship season was still remembered, but now with the context of its terrible aftermath, how a single moment of glory had ultimately led to 13 deaths and countless shattered lives. In the end, Marcus Webb's legacy wasn't his coaching accomplishments or his championship trophy. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of deriving your worth from external achievements, about letting obsession override humanity, about valuing symbols more than people. His life became a warning to coaches, teachers, parents, anyone who worked with young people. Your character matters more than your accomplishments, and the moment you forget that distinction, you risk destroying everything. The Alabama bloodbath entered true crime lore alongside other infamous serial cases, but with a unique twist. Marcus Webb wasn't motivated by sexual sadism or financial gain or ideological extremism. He killed to protect a trophy, to defend a legacy that ultimately meant nothing. His was perhaps the most pointless serial killing spree in American history, 13 lives snuffed out over an object that now sat forgotten in a storage room. If there was any lesson to be drawn from the tragedy, it was this: we are not our accomplishments. We are not our trophies or awards or wins. We are the sum of our choices, our character, how we treat others when nobody's watching. Marcus Webb forgot that truth, and in forgetting it, he destroyed himself and 13 innocent people. The trophy, that gleaming symbol of achievement that had meant everything to Marcus, eventually tarnished in storage. The engraving faded, the metal dulled, the wood cracked. It became what it always was, just an object, temporary and meaningless, certainly not worth a single human life, let alone 13. And somewhere in the collective memory of Mobile, Alabama, people still whispered about the coach who went mad, who murdered 13 men over a high school football trophy, who proved that the deadliest human emotions are pride and obsession, emotions that can transform anyone, no matter how respected or successful, into a monster.